The upcoming at the time of this recording release of the Nintendo Switch has Nintendo fans excited and investors poised, but Nintendo has had a long history, and an interesting one at that. I'm Sasha Wood, and let's dive into the top 10 Nintendo facts. Number 10. The current Nintendo logo has been in use since 1975, with the color being modified to gray in 2006. However, Nintendo has had many logos before settling on this one, which is hardly shocking given the fact that the company was founded in 1889, which makes the company 128 years old at the time of this recording. More history in at number 9. From 1889 to 1956, Nintendo was a card company making the playing cards for Hanafuda, which also refers to the games played with the cards. The cards became so popular that expansion was necessary to meet the demand. The company took on the name Nintendo Karuta Co. Ltd. in 1949 and began doing business as the Nintendo Playing Card Co. outside of Japan. Some video game facts at number 8. The Game Boy, one of Nintendo's most famous products, was inspired by the Game & Watch, which was a line of handheld electronic games in production from 1980 to 1991. The creation of the device was inspired when Gunpei Yokoi spotted a bored salesman playing with his LCD calculator, so he came up with the idea of a miniature game that people could play to kill time. Throughout its run, there were 59 games produced, with the 60th only being available as a contest prize. It was simple: 2 buttons and 2 versions of the same game, one a bit more difficult. Good times and an excellent prototype for what was to come. Speaking of games brings us to number 7. Mario is one of Nintendo's iconic creations. The first game, Mario Bros, came out in 1983 as an arcade game, and the sequel, Super Mario Bros, was released in 1985 for the NES. It was initially meant to focus around a shooter mechanic, but that was abandoned so the console could map the jump control to the A button and work around that. Mario honestly has a really interesting history. We could do a list on that alone. Back to consoles in at number 6. While there was initially a huge buzz and push around the Wii U, as well as hopes that it would be just as successful as the Wii, which was the best-selling console of all time, the Wii U was plagued with many complaints: poor game lineup, poor online functionality, a bad battery life, and more. It was viewed as less exciting, especially next to the other launches that came out, such as PS4 and Xbox One. Production of this console officially shut down in January of 2017. However, Nintendo has a history of being very successful with console releases, in at number 5. Nintendo released the best-selling game console of all time, that being the NES, which is short for the Nintendo Entertainment System, though in Japan it was known as the Family Computer or Famicom. It was released there in 1983 and came over to North America in 1985 and Europe in 1986. The system actually helped to rebuild enthusiasm and confidence in video games and gaming following the video game market crash in 1983. This crash occurred after the market was absolutely flooded beyond capacity with consoles, largely with Atari but also with ColecoVision and Odyssey 2. The NES sold 61.91 million units. The record was only beaten in 2006 when Nintendo released the Wii. Some confusion in at number 4. Nintendo got a huge boost in the stock market when Pokemon Go was released, but this was due to the public misconception that they were behind the game, when really it was Niantic. Nintendo had to release a statement clarifying that they actually only own 32% of Pokemon intellectual property owner, the Pokemon Company. Following this admission, the shares dropped back down, but have since gone back up with the announcement of the Nintendo Switch. Number 3. Nintendo had to make significant adult film purchases to stop the distribution of 2 porn parodies that emerged after the Super Mario Bros. Film, which was released in 1993. Those films were Super Hornio Bros. And Super Hornio Bros. 2, but Nintendo bought the rights to them to halt distribution. But of course, some copies have leaked out and some people have seen them, and some very salty people claim that they're actually better than the adaptation. Ouch. Number 2. The obituary of Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi, who died in 2013, had to be corrected when the New York Times incorrectly printed information about Mario and Luigi. They stated that Mario and Luigi were janitors instead of plumbers. The correction read, "An obituary on September 20th about Hiroshi Yamauchi, the longtime president of Nintendo, included a quotation from a 1988 New York Times article that inaccurately described the Nintendo video game Super Mario Bros. 2. The brothers Mario and Luigi who appear in this and other Nintendo games are plumbers, not janitors. You know you're important when they correct your obituary." A much more convoluted story brings us to number 1. Nintendo is responsible for the creation of the Sony PlayStation. The device that would become the PlayStation was begun back in 1986 as a joint venture venture between Nintendo and Sony. Nintendo was looking for a way to implement the cartridge storage system for the Super Famicom, or the SNES. So they approached Sony to develop a CD-ROM add-on with the temp project name of PlayStation, also known as the SNES CD. However, the project ultimately fell through and Nintendo cancelled the whole project in 1991, at which point Sony decided to use the information they had plus their own developments to make their own console. This was announced because Nintendo discovered the original contract was found to give over complete control over any titles written on the SNES CD-ROM format to Sony. Nintendo found this unacceptable, hence dropping Sony as a partner to partner instead with Philips. There were bitter lawsuits about names, access to chips, and who owned what, but out of the ashes both companies emerged and moved on. Now there would be an interesting list, top 10 nerdy lawsuits or something like that. If you guys can help me name it, I will do it. There are actually so many. I mean, think about the Shazam Superman lawsuits, it's insane. As for Nintendo, what's your guys' favorite game? Or are you just not a fan? Share all your thoughts down below. I'm Sasha Wood, thanks so much for watching Top 10 Nerd. Like, share, comment, and of course subscribe for even more nerdy lists.